The first bullet tore through the wooden post inches from his head, splittering it into a cloud of dust and resin. Jack Callahan didn't flinch, his eyes sharp as a hawk's in the dying light, locked on the silhouettes moving at the far end of the street. 6 of them, maybe 7, hard to tell through the heat shimmer rising from the baked earth. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and the metallic tang of blood. Not his, not yet. His right hand hovered just above the worn grip of his cold peacemaker, fingers twitching with the rhythm of his heartbeat. The town of Dry Creek lay silent around him, its shuttered windows like the eyes of frightened witnesses. Somewhere, a dog barked once, then fell silent. He could feel the weight of the day pressing down on him, the sun sinking low, the shadows stretching long, the knowledge that this was the moment everything had been building toward. For weeks, the McGraw gang had been hunting him, their leader, Clay McGraw, swearing to put Jack in the ground for what happened in Red Mesa. Jack didn't regret it. He'd do it again. Another shot rang out, this one kicking up dirt at his boots. He stepped sideways, slow and deliberate, his spurs whispering against the ground. His mind was calm, but his chest burned with a quiet rage. They'd taken his horse 2 days ago. They'd burned the barn where he'd been sleeping. And last night, they'd left a message carved into the door of the saloon. "We finish this tomorrow." Tomorrow was now. The gang fanned out, their boots crunching on the dry earth. Clay's voice carried across the street, low and mocking. "Jack Callahan, thought you'd run. Guess you ain't as smart as they say." Jack's lips curled into the faintest smile. "Guess you'll find out what I am." The wind picked up, carrying with it the smell of sagebrush and the faint rattle of a loose shutter. Jack's eyes scanned the street, the overturned wagon to his left, the water trough to his right, the narrow alley between the general store and the blacksmith's. Every detail mattered. Every shadow could be life or death. The first man broke from the group, charging forward with a yell. Jack's hand moved faster than thought. The Colt cleared leather, the hammer fell, and the man crumpled mid-stride, his revolver clattering to the ground. The echo of the shot rolled down the street like distant thunder. The others hesitated, just for a heartbeat. Jack felt it, the shift in their confidence, the tiny fracture in their courage. He stepped forward, his boots leaving shallow prints in the dust. "You boys came a long way for nothing," he said, his voice steady. Clay spat into the dirt. "We came for blood. Then you should have brought more men." The next few seconds were chaos. Gunfire exploding in sharp, deafening cracks, bullets whining past his ears. Jack moved like water, flowing from cover to cover, his shots precise, each one finding its mark. The world narrowed to the rhythm of breath and trigger, the smell of smoke, the heat of the metal in his hand. A slug grazed his left arm, tearing through his sleeve and leaving a hot, stinging line of pain. He gritted his teeth, ignoring it. Pain was a distraction, and distractions got you killed. By the time the dust began to settle, 3 of them were down. The rest were pulling back, their eyes darting between Jack and the bodies of their friends. Clay stood in the middle of the street, his jaw tight, his revolver steady. "You think you're some kind of hero?" Clay growled. Jack's voice was quiet, but it carried. "No, I'm just the man who's still standing." They circled each other, the space between them shrinking with every step. Jack could see the sweat on Clay's brow, the twitch in his trigger finger. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then Clay fired. Jack moved before the sound reached him, his body twisting, his own shot answering in the same heartbeat. Clay staggered, his revolver slipping from his hand, his eyes wide with disbelief. He fell to his knees, then forward into the dust. Silence. Jack stood there for a long moment, the weight of the fight settling into his bones. The wind tugged at his coat, carrying away the last wisps of gun smoke. He holstered his Colt and turned toward the edge of town. The sun was almost gone now, the sky painted in streaks of gold and crimson. Jack's shadow stretched long ahead of him as he walked, each step carrying him farther from Dry Creek, from the blood and the dust, from the men who thought they could break him. They were wrong. The desert night came fast, swallowing the last streaks of gold until only a bruised purple sky remained. Jack Callahan moved with the steady rhythm of a man who'd walked this land his whole life, but every step carried the weight of the fight he'd just left behind. His arm throbbed where the bullet had grazed him, the torn sleeve fluttering in the cooling wind. The silence out here was different from the silence in town. In Dry Creek, it had been tense, watchful, the kind that holds its breath before a gun goes off. Out here, it was vast and endless, broken only by the whisper of sand shifting under his boots and the occasional cry of a night bird. But Jack knew better than to trust it. Somewhere behind him, the survivors of the McGraw gang would be licking their wounds, counting their dead, and deciding whether revenge was worth the risk. He figured it was. Men like that didn't forgive, and they sure as hell didn't forget. He reached a ridge and paused, scanning the horizon. The moon was just climbing, silvering the edges of the mesas and painting the desert floor in pale light. In the distance, a thin ribbon of smoke curled into the sky, too far to be from Dry Creek. A campfire. Jack's jaw tightened. Could be travelers, could be trouble. Either way, he needed water and maybe a horse. His own, a chestnut mare named Ruby, was probably halfway to the border by now. Driven off by the MCGRAWS. He descended the ridge, keeping low, his boots silent on the sand. The closer he got, the more he could make out. The flicker of firelight, the low murmur of voices, the occasional metallic clink of a rifle being set down. Then he heard it, a laugh he recognized. High, sharp, and mean, Harlan Pike, one of Clay McGraw's lieutenants. Jack's pulse quickened, but his movement stayed slow, deliberate. He eased closer until he could see them, for men around the fire, their faces lit in orange and shadow. Harlan sat with his back to the flames, a bottle in one hand, his revolver resting on his thigh. The others were younger, jumpier, their eyes darting into the darkness beyond the firelight. Jack crouched behind a boulder, weighing his options. He could wait them out, slip in when they slept, but the thought of leaving them alive, leaving them to come after him again, didn't sit right. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of the fire and the faint tang of whiskey. Jack's fingers brushed the grip of his Colt. He stepped out from behind the rock. "Evenin', boys." The reaction was instant. Chairs scraped, hands went for guns, curses filled the air. But Jack was already moving, his first shot taking the nearest man in the shoulder, spinning him to the ground. The second man fired wildly, the muzzle flash lighting his terrified face before Jack's bullet dropped him. Harlan dove for cover, rolling behind a crate. "Callahan!" he shouted, his voice cracking. "You're a dead man." Jack advanced, the firelight dancing in his eyes. "You've been saying that all week." A shot rang out from the shadows, close, too close. Jack felt the wind of it past his cheek. He dropped to one knee, firing twice into the dark. A grunt, then silence, that left Harlan. The man burst from behind the crate, charging with a knife in hand, his face twisted with rage. Jack sidestepped, catching Harlan's wrist and twisting hard. The knife clattered to the ground. They grappled, the fire throwing their shadows long and wild against the rocks. Harlan was strong, but desperation made him sloppy. Jack drove a fist into his gut, then another across his jaw. The man staggered, spitting blood, and reached for his revolver. Jack's shot was clean, final. The desert was quiet again, save for the crackle of the fire. Jack stood over Harlan's body for a moment, breathing hard. The smell of gunpowder and sweat thick in the air. He searched the camp quickly, found a canteen, half full, and a bay gelding tied to a post. The horse snorted as Jack approached, but didn't shy away. He stroked its neck, murmuring low, then swung into the saddle as he rode away. The firelight faded behind him, swallowed by the dark. The wind picked up, carrying with it the faint scent of rain, rare in these parts, but welcome. Jack didn't look back. He knew the McGraw gang was finished, but the desert had a way of birthing new enemies, and he'd learned long ago that peace was just the space between fights. Tonight, though, he'd take the space. The first light of dawn bled slowly into the desert, turning the jagged cliffs ahead into black silhouettes against a pale orange sky. Jack Callahan urged the bay gelding forward, its breath steaming in the cool air. The night had been long, the kind that gnawed at a man's bones, but he'd kept riding. He knew the McGraw gang wasn't finished, not yet. The canyon loomed ahead, a narrow cut through the rock where the wind moaned like a restless spirit. Jack didn't like it. Too many blind corners, Too many places for a man to hide with a rifle and a grudge. But the alternative was a 2-day ride around the cliffs, and he didn't have that kind of time. The gelding's hooves struck sparks from the stone as they entered the pass. The air cooled instantly, shadows swallowing them whole. Jack's eyes scanned the ridges above, every muscle in his body coiled tight. That's when he heard it. The faint scrape of boot leather on rock. He pulled the horse to a stop, the sound of its breathing loud in the stillness. The canyon walls rose high on either side, their surfaces scarred and pitted. Somewhere up there, someone was moving. A voice echoed down, distorted by the stone. "You should have kept riding." Callahan. Jack recognized it instantly. Wade McGraw, Clay's younger brother. "Meaner, if that was possible. Guess you didn't get the news," Jack called back, his voice steady. "Your brother's not coming." There was a pause, then a low chuckle. "I heard. That's why I'm here." The first shot came from the left ridge, the bullet sparking off the canyon wall inches from Jack's head. He kicked the gelding forward, the sound of gunfire exploding around him. Chips of stone stung his face as he rode hard, weaving through the narrow bends. 2 more riders appeared ahead, blocking the path. Jack's heart slammed against his ribs. He yanked the reins, steering the gelding toward a narrow side gully. The horse leapt over a fallen boulder, hooves pounding on loose gravel. The gully twisted sharply, the walls closing in until Jack could almost touch both sides. Behind him, the sound of pursuit grew louder, shouts, hoof beats, the metallic clatter of rifles being cocked. He spotted a break in the rock ahead, barely wide enough for the horse. Without slowing, he leaned low over the gelding's neck and drove them through. The passage spat them out onto a ledge high above the canyon floor. The drop was sheer, the wind tugging at his coat. Below, Wade and his men thundered past, not realizing he'd slipped above them. Jack swung down from the saddle, leading the gelding along the narrow ledge until they reached a wider shelf. From here, he had the high ground. He drew his Colt, the metal warm from the morning sun, and waited. The echoes of the gang's voices drifted up from below, growing fainter as they moved deeper into the canyon. Jack's breathing slowed, his focus narrowing to the rhythm of the hunt. When Wade finally appeared in the open, Jack fired. The shot cracked like a whip, the sound bouncing off the canyon walls. Wade's horse reared, throwing him hard into the dust. The others scattered, scrambling for cover. But Jack's position gave him the advantage. Each shot was measured, deliberate. One by one, the riders fell or fled, their shouts fading into the distance. When the last echo died, Jack holstered his Colt and looked down at Wade. The man was alive, but barely, clutching his side and glaring up with pure venom. Jack's voice was low, almost calm. "This is where it ends." He turned away, mounting the gelding. The canyon was quiet again, the only sound the wind sighing through the stone. As he rode out into the open desert, the sun broke fully over the horizon, painting the land in gold. Jack didn't smile, but there was a weight lifted from his shoulders. The McGraw name was finished, and for the first time in weeks, the road ahead felt like it belonged to him. By midday, the desert heat was pressing down like a blacksmith's hammer. Jack Callahan rode with his hat pulled low, the bay gelding's ears flicking at the flies. The canyon was behind him now, but the echoes of gunfire still clung to his mind like smoke. He'd won again, but victory in the West was never clean. It left a man with more ghosts than glory. The land ahead rolled out in waves of ochre and gold, dotted with stubborn sagebrush and the occasional twisted mesquite. In the distance, a thin line of cottonwoods marked the course of a creek. Water, shelter, maybe a place to breathe. As he approached, the sound of running water reached him, soft, almost delicate against the vast silence. He dismounted, letting the gelding drink while he knelt to splash his face. The water was cool, sharp with the taste of minerals. That's when he saw the tracks. Fresh. 2 horses, one rider heavy in the saddle, the other lighter, maybe a woman, maybe a boy. The prints cut across the creek bed and vanished into the low hills to the east. Jack's gut tightened. He'd learned to read the land like a ledger, and these tracks told a story. The smaller horse stumbling, the heavier rider pushing hard. A chase. He almost turned away. He'd done his fighting for the week, but something in the way those hoofprints dug deep into the earth, desperate, uneven, pulled at him. He mounted up and followed. The trail wound into a shallow valley where the air felt heavier, the sun trapped between the hills. He kept his eyes moving, scanning the ridgelines. The West had a way of turning rescues into ambushes. Half an hour later, he found them. A young woman, no more than 20, stood with her back to a boulder, a revolver shaking in her hands. Facing her were two men, rough, dust-caked, the kind who smiled with their teeth but not their eyes. One held her reins, the other stepped closer, his voice low and oily. Jack didn't announce himself. He rode in slow, the gelding's hooves muffled in the sand, until he was close enough to speak without shouting. "Seems to me," he said, "the lady's not interested in your company." The men spun, hands going for their guns. Jack's Colt was already out, steady as a church bell. "Easy," he said. "You can walk away or you can be carried." The taller one sneered. "Ain't your business, stranger." Jack's eyes didn't leave theirs. "It is now." For a moment, the only sound was the wind sighing through the grass. Then the shorter man's nerve broke. He dropped the reins and backed away. The taller one hesitated, then spat in the dirt and followed. Jack waited until they were specks on the horizon before lowering his gun. The woman's hands were still trembling as she holstered her revolver. "I had it under control," she said, though her voice betrayed her. Jack gave a small nod. "Sure you did." She managed a faint smile. "Name's Eliza, Jack." They rode together to the creek, where she watered her horse and told him her story. How she'd been riding to her uncle's ranch when the men cut her off. How she'd been circling the hills trying to lose them. Jack listened, saying little. But inside, something shifted. He'd spent weeks with nothing but enemies for company. And now here was someone who didn't want him dead. Someone who looked at him without the weight of old grudges. When they parted ways at the fork in the trail, Eliza thanked him again. Jack tipped his hat, watching her ride off until she was just a shimmer in the heat. The desert was quiet once more, but it felt different now, less like an empty expanse, more like a place where something might grow. He turned the gelding west, the sun at his back, and rode on. The sun was sinking low when Jack first saw the smoke. It rose in a thin, dark column from the direction Eliza had taken that morning, twisting against the orange sky like a warning. His gut tightened. Smoke in the desert could mean a lot of things: a campfire, a signal, a ranch burning. But the way it smeared across the horizon told him it wasn't friendly. He spurred the bay gelding into a gallop, the wind tearing at his coat. The land blurred past, sagebrush whipping by, the ground hard and cracked beneath pounding hooves. Every stride brought the smell closer, scorched wood, and something darker beneath it. When he crested the last rise, his stomach dropped. The small ranch house at the edge of the cottonwood grove was ablaze, flames licking at the roof, windows glowing like the eyes of some furious beast. The corral gate hung open, horses gone, and in the yard, 3 riders circled like vultures. Jack didn't need to guess who they were. The McGraw name might be finished, but not every man who'd ridden with them had been in that canyon. Some had been waiting for a chance to settle their own scores, and now they'd found Eliza. He didn't slow. The gelding thundered down the slope, Jack's Colt already in his hand. The first rider turned at the sound, eyes going wide before Jack's bullet took him clean out of the saddle. The other to split, one firing wildly, the other spurring toward the barn. Jack leaned low, feeling the hot breath of a bullet pass his cheek, and returned fire. The second man tumbled into the dust, his rifle skittering away. The third made it to the barn, vanishing inside. Jack reined in hard, sliding from the saddle. The heat from the burning house hit him like a wall, the roar of the flames mixing with the frantic whinny of a horse inside the barn. And then he heard her, Jack. Her voice was hoarse, ragged. He ran toward it, kicking the barn door wide. Smoke billowed out, stinging his eyes. Through the haze, he saw Eliza, tied to a post, the third rider standing over her with a knife. Jack didn't think. He moved. The man spun, slashing out, but Jack caught his wrist, driving his shoulder into the man's chest. They crashed into the wall, the knife clattering to the floor. The rider swung a fist, catching Jack across the jaw, but Jack barely felt it. He drove a knee into the man's gut, then slammed him back into the post. The man sagged, gasping. Jack's fist ended it. He cut Eliza loose, her hands raw from the rope. She coughed hard, eyes watering from the smoke. "Can you walk?" he asked. She nodded, though her legs trembled. He got her outside, the cool air hitting them like a blessing. The gelding danced nervously nearby, ears pinned at the fire's roar. They mounted up together, Jack pulling her close as he turned the horse toward the open desert. Behind them, the ranch collapsed in on itself, sending a shower of sparks into the darkening sky. They didn't slow until the fire was just a glow on the horizon. When they finally stopped, Eliza slid down from the saddle, her face pale but her eyes steady. "They weren't after me," she said quietly. "They were after you." Jack looked away, jaw tight. "Doesn't matter. They found you instead." She stepped closer. "Then maybe you stop riding alone." For a long moment, he didn't answer. The desert stretched out around them, endless and silent. He'd spent years keeping his distance from people, knowing that anyone close to him became a target. But tonight, watching the fire fade, he felt the weight of that choice more than ever. Finally, he said, "We'll see." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain again. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled. Jack holstered his Colt, mounted up, and turned the gelding toward the horizon. Eliza swung up behind him without a word. They rode on into the deepening night, the fire behind them, and whatever waited ahead. The rain came in thin, slanting sheets, turning the desert dust into a slick, rust-colored paste. Jack Callahan rode with his collar up, the brim of his hat dripping steadily. Behind him, Eliza sat quiet, her arms looped loosely around his waist, her breathing steady against his back. They'd been riding for hours, keeping to the low ground, avoiding the ridgelines where a silhouette could give them away. Jack didn't say it out loud, but he knew they were being followed, not by the remnants of the McGraw gang. This was different, cleaner, more patient. He'd caught the first sign at dawn, a single set of hoofprints trailing theirs, always just far enough back to keep out of sight. Whoever it was, they knew how to track without being seen. By midday, he'd found the second sign, a spent cartridge in the dirt, polished by the rain. A quiet message, "I'm close now." As the light began to fade, the feeling of being watched pressed down on him like the weight of the storm clouds overhead. They reached a narrow wash where the rainwater ran in shallow streams, carving fresh channels in the earth. Jack pulled the gelding to a stop. "We rest here," he said. Eliza slid down, stretching her legs. "You think they'll catch up?" Jack scanned the ridges. "They're already here." Her eyes widened, but she didn't speak. She'd learned quickly that Jack didn't waste words. They built a small fire under the shelter of an overhang, the flames struggling against the damp air. Jack sat with his back to the rock, cleaning his Colt, every movement slow and deliberate. It was near dark when the first sound came, the faint clink of metal on stone. Not close, but not far enough for comfort. Jack stood, motioning for Eliza to stay low. He stepped out into the rain, letting his eyes adjust to the shifting shadows. A figure emerged from the gloom, tall and lean, a long oilskin coat dripping water. His hat was pulled low, but Jack could see the pale glint of his eyes. "Evenin', Callahan," the man said, his voice smooth as oiled leather. Jack's grip tightened on the Colt. "You've got my name." "What's yours?" "Elias Crow. Folks pay me to find men." "You've been on my list a while." Jack's jaw tightened. "Bounty." Crow smiled faintly. "Dead or alive. But I hear you're worth more breathing." The rain hissed in the silence between them. Jack could feel Eliza's eyes on his back. "You could turn around," Jack said. "Forget you saw me." Crow shook his head slowly. "Not how I make my living." The draw was sudden, almost too fast to see. Crow's revolver cleared leather in a blur, but Jack was already moving, diving sideways into the mud as the shot cracked past his ear. He rolled, came up on one knee, and fired. Crow slipped behind a boulder, the muzzle flash lighting his face for an instant. The rain turned the air into a haze of steam and smoke. Jack moved low, circling, his boots silent in the wet earth. He could hear Crow's breathing now, steady, controlled. This wasn't a man who panicked. A shot rang out, close enough to kick mud into Jack's face. He wiped it away, heart pounding, and fired twice toward the sound. One shot sparked off the rock, the other vanished into the dark. Then silence. Jack waited, every muscle tight. The rain drummed on the stone, masking smaller sounds. He edged forward, Colt ready. Crow was gone. Jack scanned the ridges, but the night had swallowed him whole. He returned to the fire, where Eliza was crouched low, her eyes searching his face. "He's not done," Jack said quietly. "Men like that don't quit." She swallowed hard. "Then what do we do?" Jack holstered the Colt, the weight of it a familiar comfort. "We keep moving, and we make sure when he comes again, we're ready." The fire hissed in the rain, throwing long, wavering shadows against the rock. Somewhere out in the dark, Elias Crow was watching, waiting. And Jack Callahan knew the next time they met, only one of them would walk away. The wind carried the smell of rain and rust as Jack Callahan and Eliza rode into the abandoned mining town. The place was nothing but bones now, warped storefronts leaning into the wind, windows gaping like broken teeth, the main street littered with scraps of tin and tumbleweed. The storm was close. Lightning flickered on the horizon, throwing the jagged peaks into stark relief. Jack knew Crow was here. He could feel it, the way the air seemed to hold its breath, the way the gelding's ears twitched at sounds too faint for human hearing. They dismounted near the old livery stable. Jack tied the horse under the shelter of the overhang, then turned to Eliza. "You stay here," he said. Her eyes narrowed. "Not a chance. This isn't like the others," Jack said. "Crow's not a man you can scare off with a warning shot. He's patient, precise, and he's here for me." She hesitated, then nodded once. "Then don't give him the chance." Jack stepped into the street, boots crunching on gravel. The wind tugged at his coat, carrying the faint creak of a sign swinging on rusted chains. "Crow," he called. His voice echoed off the empty buildings. "Let's finish this for a moment." Nothing. Then a figure stepped from the shadows of the old saloon, tall, lean, oilskin coat flapping in the wind. Crow's revolver hung loose at his side, but his eyes were locked on Jack's. "You've been a hard man to catch," Crow said. Jack's hand hovered near his Colt. "You caught me. Now what?" Crow's smile was thin. "Now I get paid." The first crack of thunder rolled overhead, and with it came the draw. Both men moved in the same heartbeat, steel flashing in the lightning. The roar of gunfire swallowed by the storm. Jack's first shot grazed Crow's shoulder, spinning him slightly. Crow's return fire tore through Jack's coat, close enough to burn the skin beneath. They moved apart, circling, boots splashing in the growing puddles. Lightning lit the street again, and Jack saw Eliza in the stable doorway, her eyes wide. He shook his head sharply. "Stay back." Crow feinted left, then fired twice. Jack dove behind a water trough, the wood splintering under the impact. He came up firing, forcing Crow into the cover of a collapsed awning. The rain came harder now, drumming on the rooftops, turning the dust to mud. Every breath burned in Jack's chest, every muscle tight with focus. Crow broke cover, charging low. Jack's shot caught him in the thigh, but the man kept coming, slamming into Jack and sending them both into the mud. They grappled, the revolvers knocked aside, fists and elbows finding their marks. Crow's hand closed around Jack's throat, pressing hard. Jack's vision narrowed, the roar of the storm fading to a dull thud in his ears. He reached down, fingers closing on a shard of broken glass, and drove it into Crow's side. The bounty hunter gasped, his grip loosening. Jack shoved him off, scrambling for his Colt. Crow reached for his own revolver, but Jack was faster. The shot was deafening in the close rain-soaked air. Crow slumped back into the mud, eyes still open, but seeing nothing. Jack stood there for a long moment, chest heaving, the rain washing the blood from his hands. Lightning flashed again, and he saw Eliza running toward him. "You're hurt," she said, her voice tight. Jack shook his head. "Not bad." He glanced down at Crow's still form. "It's over." They stood in the rain, the storm breaking around them, the ghost town silent once more. Jack holstered his Colt and looked at Eliza. "We ride at first light." She nodded. "Where to?" He gave a faint smile. "Somewhere the trail's harder to follow." The thunder rolled again, but this time it sounded far away. The morning broke clean and sharp, the air washed clear by the night's rain. The desert stretched out in every direction, its colors richer now, reds deeper, golds brighter, the sky a hard, endless blue. Jack Callahan sat by the small fire he'd built at dawn. the smoke rising in a thin, straight column. Across from him, Eliza sipped coffee from a tin cup, her hair still damp from the rain. They hadn't spoken much since leaving the ghost town. The silence wasn't awkward. It was the kind that comes when words feel too small for what's been survived. Jack's eyes kept drifting to the horizon. Out here, quiet could be a gift, but it could also be a lie. He'd learned long ago that peace in the West was never permanent. "You're thinking about him," Eliza said suddenly. Jack looked up. "Crow." She nodded. "He's done," Jack said. "But there'll be others. There always are." Eliza set her cup down. "Then maybe it's time you stopped giving them reasons to come." Jack gave a faint smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "It's not about reasons. Some men just need someone to chase. And I've been that someone for a long time." The fire popped softly. A hawk circled high above, its shadow gliding over the sand. Eliza leaned forward. "You could come with me. My uncle's ranch, it's not much, but it's quiet. You'd have work, a roof, people who don't want you dead." Jack didn't answer right away. He pictured it, the smell of fresh-cut hay, the sound of wind in the cottonwoods, the weight of a day's work that didn't end with a gun in his hand. It was a good picture. Too good, I'd bring trouble with me. He said finally. "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe you'd finally outrun it." Jack studied her face. She wasn't afraid of him, and she wasn't trying to save him. She was just offering something he hadn't had in years, a choice. He stood, kicking dirt over the fire. "We'll ride that way for a while. See how it feels." Her smile was small but real. "That's all I'm asking." They broke camp and rode side by side, the gelding steady gait carrying them toward the low hills in the distance. The land softened as they went, more grass, more trees, the air cooler by midday. They reached a ridge that looked down over a wide valley. A river wound through it, silver in the sun, and beyond it, a cluster of buildings, the ranch. Eliza's voice was quiet. "Home." Jack looked at it for a long moment. It wasn't much, a few barns, a corral, a main house with a porch, but it had the kind of stillness that didn't feel like a trap. They rode down into the valley, the sound of the river growing louder. As they crossed the shallow ford, Jack felt something loosen in his chest. Maybe it wouldn't last. Maybe the trail would find him again. But for now, the only thing ahead was the road to the ranch and the woman riding beside him. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. The first week at the ranch passed in a rhythm Jack Callahan hadn't known in years. Mornings started with the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen, the low murmur of Eliza talking with her uncle, and the creak of the porch boards under his boots as he stepped out into the cool air. The work was honest, mending fences, hauling feed, checking the herd. His hands, more used to the weight of a revolver, began to remember the feel of rope and wood. The ache in his muscles at night was different now, earned from labor instead of fighting, but the quiet had edges. Every time a rider appeared on the far ridge, Jack's eyes narrowed, his hand drifting toward his hip. Every creak of the barn door at night had him awake, listening. The ranch was open land, and open land meant open approaches. Eliza noticed. "You're still looking over your shoulder," she said one evening, leaning against the corral fence as the sun bled into the horizon. Jack shrugged. "Habit or instinct," she said. "Either way, it's not going anywhere, is it?" He didn't answer. That night, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Jack lay awake in the small room off the kitchen, staring at the ceiling. He told himself it was just the weather, but his gut said otherwise. By the second week, the signs were there, faint, but clear to a man who knew how to read them. A fence post cut clean, not broken. Hoofprints near the creek that didn't belong to any of the ranch horses. A cigarette but still warm in the dirt by the north pasture. He didn't tell Eliza. Not yet. Instead, he started rising earlier, riding the perimeter before the sun was up. He kept his colt close, the weight of it a reminder that peace was only as strong as the man willing to defend it. One morning, just after dawn, he spotted movement in the cottonwoods by the river. A single rider, watching the ranch, too far to make out a face, but close enough to know they weren't passing through. Jack rode toward them at a steady pace, not rushing, not showing his hand. The rider waited until he was halfway there, then turned and disappeared into the trees. When Jack returned, Eliza was waiting by the barn, "You saw someone," she said. He nodded. "They're testing the edges." Her jaw tightened. "Then we push back." Jack almost smiled. She had grit, no doubt about it. But pushing back meant stepping off the safe ground they'd built here. That night, he sat on the porch long after the lamps inside had gone out, the stars sharp above him. The land was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that comes before something breaks. He knew then that the fight wasn't over. It had just changed shape, and when it came, he'd be ready. The night was heavy with stillness, the kind that made every sound feel louder than it should. The moon hung low, a pale coin behind thin clouds, casting the ranch in a silver wash. Jack Callahan sat on the porch, boots propped on the railing, a cup of black coffee cooling in his hand. He wasn't drinking it for the taste. He was drinking it to stay awake. For 3 nights now, he'd felt the pressure building, the subtle signs that someone was testing the ranch's defenses. A fence post cut clean, hoofprints where no ranch horse should have been, a cigarette but still warm in the dirt, and that rider in the cottonwoods, watching. Jack had told Eliza only part of it. She knew someone was out there, but not how close they'd been. He didn't want her sleeping with fear in her chest. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of wet earth from the creek. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote yipped once, then fell silent. Jack's eyes swept the dark edges of the property, the barn, the corral, the tree line beyond. That's when he heard it. Not the wind, not an animal. A soft, deliberate click, metal against metal. He set the cup down without a sound, his hand sliding to the cold at his hip. The weight of it was familiar, grounding. He rose slowly, scanning the shadows. A shape moved near the barn. Then another. Jack's voice was low, almost a whisper. "They're here." The door behind him creaked. Eliza stepped out, her hair loose, eyes sharp despite the hour. "How many?" "3, maybe more." She didn't flinch. "What do you need?" Jack's gaze stayed on the barn. "You, inside. Bolt the door. Keep the rifle close." She hesitated, then nodded. "Don't get yourself killed." He gave a faint smile. "Not tonight." The first shot came from the dark, a muzzle flash near the corral, the bullet whining past Jack's shoulder and splintering the porch post. He dropped low, returning fire. The crack of his Colt echoed across the yard, followed by the thud of a body hitting dirt. Shouts erupted. 2 men broke from cover, running for the barn. Jack moved fast, cutting them off with 2 quick shots. One went down hard, the other dove behind a water trough. From the corner of his eye, Jack caught movement near the house, a shadow slipping along the wall toward the kitchen door. He pivoted, firing once. The shadow crumpled, a knife clattering to the ground. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and the sharp tang of fear. Jack's heart pounded, but his mind was cold, clear. He'd been here before, too many times. A voice called from the dark. "Callahan, you've got something that belongs to us." Jack's reply was flat. "You're gonna have to be more specific." Laughter, low and mean. "The girl. Step aside, and maybe we let you live." Jack's jaw tightened. Not happening. The next volley came hard, 3 rifles firing in quick succession. Bullets tore into the porch, shattered a window, punched holes in the siding. Jack rolled off the steps, landing in the dirt, and sprinted for the cover of the wagon. He reloaded fast, the motions automatic. The rain from earlier in the week had left the ground soft, muffling his steps as he moved along the wagon's shadow. He spotted one of the riflemen crouched near the fence line, his attention fixed on the house. Jack's shot was clean, the man dropping without a sound. The others hesitated, and in that pause, Jack heard it, the faint creak of the barn door. Eliza. She stepped out, rifle in hand, eyes locked on the trough where the last man was hiding. Before Jack could call out, she fired. The man jerked, then went still. The yard was quiet again, save for the ragged breathing of the horses in the corral. Jack scanned the shadows, listening. No more movement, no more voices. He lowered his Colt, the tension in his shoulders easing just enough to feel the ache. Eliza crossed the yard to him, her face pale but steady. "That all of them?" "For tonight," Jack said. "But they'll be back." She nodded, glancing at the bodies. "Then we'll be ready." Jack looked at her for a long moment. She wasn't the same woman he'd met on the trail, not anymore. She'd seen what it took to hold ground out here, and she hadn't flinched. The moon slipped behind a cloud, and the yard fell into deeper shadow. Jack holstered his Colt, the weight of it a reminder that peace was never free. They dragged the bodies to the edge of the property, leaving them for the coyotes. By the time they finished, the first light of dawn was touching the horizon. Jack stood on the porch, watching the sky turn from gray to gold. Eliza joined him, leaning against the railing. "You think they'll try again soon?" she asked. He nodded. "Men like that don't take losing well." She smiled faintly. "Good thing neither do we." Jack didn't smile, but there was a glint in his eyes. "We'll keep the coffee hot." The sun broke over the hills, spilling light across the ranch. For now, it was quiet again. But Jack knew the quiet wouldn't last. It never did. The days after the night raid were deceptively calm. The ranch went about its business, cattle driven to the upper pasture, fences mended, the smell of fresh hay drifting from the barn. But Jack Callahan knew better than to believe in calm for long. The men who'd come in the dark hadn't been drifters or desperate thieves. They'd moved with purpose, with coordination. And they'd known his name. It was the third morning after the attack when the first real sign came. Jack was riding the north fence line, the gelding's hooves muffled in the damp earth, when he spotted it, a strip of red cloth tied to the top wire. It wasn't torn by accident. It was a marker. He scanned the horizon. The land rolled away in gentle swells toward the Bitter Creek hills, the grass swaying in the breeze. Somewhere out there, someone was watching. When he returned to the ranch, Eliza was in the corral, working a young bay mare. She saw his face and stopped. "What is it?" Jack held up the cloth. "They're scouting." Marking the edges, her jaw tightened. "Same men." He shook his head. "No, these are better." That night, he sat on the porch long after the lamps inside had gone out. The stars were sharp above, the air cool. He thought about the men he'd crossed in his life, rustlers, bounty hunters, hired guns. But there was one name that fit the way these new enemies moved: Silas Kane. Kane had been a captain in the war, a man who'd traded his uniform for a gang of disciplined killers. They weren't loud like the McGraws. They didn't swagger into town and start trouble. They studied, they planned, and when they struck, it was clean and final. Jack had crossed Kane years ago in Bitter Creek, taking a payroll shipment Kane's men had stolen before it could be laundered through the mining company. Kane had lost men that day, men he'd wanted back in blood. If Kane was here, it meant one thing: he'd finally decided to collect. The next day, Jack rode into town for supplies. The main street was quiet, the air heavy with the smell of dust and horses. He stopped at the general store, loading flour, coffee, and ammunition into his saddlebags. As he stepped out, a man leaned against the hitching post across the street. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a black coat despite the heat. His hat was pulled low, but Jack could see the pale scar running from his left temple to his jaw. The man smiled without warmth. "Callahan." Jack's hand hovered near his Colt. "You with Kane?" The man didn't answer directly. "He knows where you sleep now." Jack's voice was flat. "Then he knows how to find me." The man's smile widened, but there was no humor in it. "He's not in a hurry. Says it's better when a man has time to think about what's coming." Jack stepped off the boardwalk, closing the distance until they were a few feet apart. "Tell Kane I'm done running. If he wants me, he can come himself." The man's eyes narrowed. "He will." Jack turned and mounted up, riding out of town without looking back. But he could feel the man's gaze on him until the buildings fell away behind him. That night, he told Eliza the truth. "Kane's here," he said. She frowned. "Who is he?" "Trouble," Jack said simply. "The kind that doesn't stop until one of us is in the ground." She didn't flinch. "Then we make sure it's not you." Jack almost smiled. "It's not just me anymore. He'll use you to get to me." Eliza's eyes were steady. "Then he'll find out I'm not easy to use." For the next week, they prepared. Jack reinforced the barn doors, set tripwires along the north and east approaches, and cached extra ammunition in the house and the bunkhouse. Eliza practiced with the rifle every evening until she could hit a tin can. At 50 yards without missing, the waiting was the hardest part. Every creak of the windmill, every distant hoofbeat set Jack's nerves on edge. He slept in short bursts, his cold always within reach. It was on the 8th night that the quiet finally cracked. The first sign was the horses, restless in the corral, snorting and stamping. Then came the faint metallic clink of tack being adjusted, too far from the barn to be friendly. Jack was already moving, pulling on his boots, checking the Colt's cylinder. Eliza met him at the door, rifle in hand. "How many?" she whispered. "Can't tell yet," he said. "Stay low." They slipped out the back, moving along the shadow of the house toward the barn. The moon was high, silvering the yard. Then Jack saw them, 4 riders, moving in from the north, their silhouettes sharp against the pale grass. They weren't rushing. They were closing in slow, deliberate. Jack's voice was low. "Kane's not with them. This is a probe." The first shot came from the dark, a sharp crack that splintered the barn door. Jack returned fire, dropping one of the riders. The others scattered, firing as they moved. Eliza's rifle barked twice, and another man went down. The last 2 wheeled their horses and vanished into the night. Jack stood in the yard, chest heaving, scanning the dark. No more movement. Eliza lowered the rifle. "They'll be back," Jack nodded. "And next time, Kane will be with them." He looked toward the north, where the land rolled away into shadow. Somewhere out there, Silas Kane was waiting. And Jack Callahan knew the fight for the ranch, and for Eliza, had only just begun. The morning broke under a sky the color of cold steel. The air was sharp, the kind that made a man's breath hang in front of him like smoke. Jack Callahan stood at the edge of the north pasture, one hand resting on the fence rail, eyes fixed on the distant ridge. He knew Kane was out there. The signs had been building for days. The red cloth marker on the fence, the probing raid, the rider in the cottonwoods. Kane was tightening the noose, not with brute force, but with patience. That was his way. Behind Jack, the ranch was waking. The lowing of cattle drifted from the far field, the rhythmic thud of an axe from the woodpile. Eliza was in the barn, her voice low as she calmed a skittish mare. Jack turned when he heard the hoof beats, slow, deliberate, not the hurried rhythm of a messenger or the uneven gait of a drifter. This was a man arriving on his own terms. The rider crested the ridge and came down the slope at a walk, tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered, wearing a long duster the color of dust. His hat was pulled low, but as he drew closer, Jack saw the pale, cold eyes and the faint smile that didn't touch them. Silas Kane. He reined in a few yards from the fence, sitting easy in the saddle. "Callahan," he said, his voice carrying in the still air. "Kane." They studied each other for a long moment. Kane's gaze swept the ranch, the barn, the corral, the house, as if he were already measuring it for a coffin. "You've built yourself a nice little place," Kane said. "Shame about the location." Jack's voice was flat. "You came a long way to talk about real estate." Kane's smile widened a fraction. "I came for what's mine. You've got nothing here." Kane tilted his head. "I've got a score. And you've got a woman who makes a fine bargaining chip." Jack's hand twitched near his Colt. "You touch her, you don't leave this valley." Kane chuckled, low and cold. "You always were quick to draw lines in the sand. Problem is, sand shifts." He swung down from the saddle, moving with the easy grace of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle and the field. He walked to the fence, resting one gloved hand on the top rail. "I'm not here to kill you today," Kane said. "I want you to think about what's coming. I want you to hear the hoof beats in your sleep. I want you to wonder every time you step outside if it's the last time." Jack met his gaze without blinking. "You've got a lot of words for a man who's afraid to pull the trigger." Kane's eyes narrowed, just for a heartbeat. Then he smiled again. "Soon, Callahan, soon." He turned, mounted up, and rode back toward the ridge without looking back. Jack watched him go, the knot in his gut tightening. Kane wasn't bluffing. He'd be back, and when he came, it wouldn't be with 4 men in the dark. It would be with enough firepower to burn the ranch to the ground. When Jack walked back to the barn, Eliza was waiting. "That was him," she said. Jack nodded. "What did he want?" Jack's voice was quiet. "To let me know he's coming." She stepped closer. "Then we make sure we're ready for the next week." The ranch became a fortress. Jack and Eliza worked side by side, reinforcing doors, digging shallow trenches along the approaches, setting up firing positions in the loft and the hayshed. The work was hard, but it kept their minds from dwelling on the inevitable. At night, Jack lay awake, listening to the wind in the eaves, the creak of the barn settling. Every sound was a question. Every shadow was a maybe. On the seventh night, the answer came. It started with the horses, restless, snorting, stamping. Then came the faint, rhythmic thud of hooves on hard ground. Not one rider. Many. Jack was already on his feet, Colt in hand, when Eliza burst in. "They're here." He moved to the window. Shapes emerged from the dark, riders fanning out, rifles glinting in the moonlight. At their head, tall in the saddle, was Kane. Jack's voice was steady. "Positions." Eliza nodded and vanished toward the loft. The first shot cracked the night open, and the fight for the ranch began. The night was black as coal, the moon hidden behind a thick quilt of storm clouds. The air was heavy, charged with the kind of stillness that comes before a lightning strike. Jack Callahan stood in the loft of the barn, his eyes fixed on the northern tree line. Somewhere out there, Silas Kane was coming. The ranch was ready as it could be. Trenches dug along the approaches, firing positions in the hay shed and the loft. Extra ammunition cached in barrels by the porch. Eliza was in the main house, the long rifle resting across the windowsill of the upstairs bedroom. Jack's heart was steady, but his mind was sharp with the knowledge that this was it. There would be no more running, no more waiting. Tonight, one of them would be left in the dirt. The first sound was the horses, restless in the corral, ears flicking toward the dark. Then came the low, rhythmic thud of hooves. Many hooves. Jack raised the spyglass. Shapes emerged from the black, riders fanning out, rifles glinting faintly in the starlight. At their head, tall in the saddle, was Kane. Even at this distance, Jack could see the man's pale eyes, fixed on the ranch like a hawk on a rabbit. Jack's voice was low but carried. "Positions." From the house, Eliza's voice answered, calm and sure. "Ready." The first shot cracked the night open, Kane's men firing from the tree line. Testing the range, the bullet smacked into the barn wall, sending a puff of splinters into the loft. Jack didn't flinch. He waited until the riders closed another 50 yards, then squeezed the trigger. His shot dropped the lead man clean out of the saddle. The yard erupted in chaos. Gunfire roared from both sides, muzzle flashes strobing the dark. The smell of powder filled the air, sharp and metallic. Horses screamed, men shouted, and the storm above grumbled like an impatient giant. Eliza's rifle barked from the house, each shot deliberate, measured. Jack saw one of Kane's men spin and fall, another clutch his arm and wheel his horse away. Kane himself stayed back, directing his men with sharp gestures. He was patient, letting them probe the defenses, looking for a weakness. Jack shifted position, firing from the loft, then dropping to the ground to reload behind the wagon. Bullets tore into the wood, splinters stinging his face. He moved again, never staying in one place long enough to be pinned. A shout from the east fence. 2 riders had broken through, galloping toward the barn. Jack sprinted to cut them off, his boots pounding the packed earth. He fired twice, the first shot grazing a rider's leg, the second taking him clean in the chest. The other veered off, only to be dropped by Eliza's rifle from the house. The fight surged and ebbed, like waves crashing against a cliff. Kane's men would press in, only to be driven back by the steady, disciplined fire from the ranch. But Jack knew they couldn't hold forever. Ammunition was finite, and Kane was too smart to waste men without a plan. Then Jack saw it, movement in the shadows near the creek. 3 men, crouched low, moving toward the house. Kane's distraction had worked. While the main force kept the defenders busy, the smaller group was slipping in to take Eliza. Jack didn't think. He broke from cover, sprinting across the yard, bullets whining past him. He hit the first man like a hammer, driving him into the mud. The second swung his rifle like a club, catching Jack across the shoulder, but Jack twisted, yanking the weapon free and smashing the butt into the man's jaw. The third man raised his pistol, but Eliza's shot from the window took him before he could fire. Jack looked up at her, breathless. She gave a quick nod, then turned back to the fight. The storm finally broke. Rain came in sheets, turning the yard to mud, soaking powder and blurring vision. The gunfire slowed, men shouting to be heard over the roar. Kane rode forward now, his duster plastered to him, his revolver in hand. He dismounted in the center of the yard, walking toward Jack with the slow, deliberate steps of a man who'd been waiting years for this moment. "Callahan," he shouted over the rain. "Just you and me now." Jack stepped out from behind the wagon, Colt in hand. That's how it should have been from the start. They circled each other in the mud, the storm raging around them. Kane's eyes never left Jack's, his smile thin and cold. "You cost me men," Kane said. "Money, time. Tonight, I take it all back." Jack's voice was steady. "You'll take a bullet, Kane. That's all." The draw was sudden, almost as fast as sea. Both guns roared, the flashes lighting their faces for an instant. Jack felt the burn of a graze along his ribs, but Kane staggered, a dark bloom spreading across his chest. He tried to raise his gun again, but Jack's second shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him into the mud. Kane dropped to one knee, breath ragged, eyes still locked on Jack's. "You should have run," Kane gasped. Jack stepped closer, his Colt steady. "I'm done running." The final shot was deafening, even over the storm. Kane fell back, the rain washing the blood from his coat, his eyes staring sightless at the sky. For a moment, the yard was silent except for the rain. Then the remaining riders broke, spurring their horses into the dark, leaving their leader in the mud. Jack stood there, chest heaving, the weight of the fight settling into his bones. Eliza came out from the house, the rifle still in her hands, her hair plastered to her face by the rain. "It's over," she said. Jack looked at Kane's still form, then at the retreating shapes of the last of his men. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It's over." They buried Kane at the edge of the property, unmarked. The rain had stopped by then, the clouds breaking to reveal a pale dawn. Jack stood by the fresh mound, the Colt heavy at his side. Eliza came to stand beside him, her hand brushing his. "What now?" she asked. Jack looked out over the valley, the grass glistening in the morning light. "Now we live," he said. "And if trouble comes again, we'll be ready." They walked back to the house together, the sun climbing higher, burning the last of the storm from the sky. The ranch was quiet again, not the fragile quiet of waiting, but the earned quiet of survival. And for the first time in a long time, Jack Callahan believed it might just last.